YouTube, and welcome to the second episode of this channel now. And today I want to tackle a question that a lot of people have, especially those that are following a tech channel like this. At some point the question comes up, hey, I want to start coding, I want to get into IT. Maybe you've heard about a couple of good job opportunities, and there certainly are. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of job opportunities out there for talented coders, and even if you're just starting out and maybe you know how to make a website, maybe just the front end, doesn't really matter. There's a lot of demand out there for it, demand that can't actually be satisfied by the people who are currently in the workforce. So it might actually really be a good idea and valid career advice to go for, learning how to code. There are boot camps out there. They usually take you probably between 2 and 3 months if you want to be really good at it. There's probably camps out there that you can do in like 2 weeks, and they will get you familiar with the basics, and then the rest basically is up to you on, how you want to evolve, where you want to go from there. And that's perfectly fine. But one of the questions that always comes up with this need to want to code or to want to change your career path is, what should I start with? There's a ton of coding languages out there. I have no idea really how to start, where to look. And if you've never programmed before, I get it. It can be extremely overwhelming to find the right coding language, the right programming language for your needs. And a lot of people have said this already, maybe even to you already, but I'm going to say it again because it's so important. The language that you choose does not really matter. Just get started on coding and try to understand the architecture and how to engineer proper software and how to test it. And once you understand those 3 things, you can basically go out and pick up some new syntax and do those very same things in a lot of different languages. Now, don't bombard me in the comments with, but this language is specially made for this, and this language is more efficient doing that. I know. There are specific use cases for each language, and almost all of them have a right to be here just because they cater to a couple of specific use cases, and they do that really well. However, there's a ton of languages that basically do all of the things that you can imagine, almost, and that are very flexible in how you want to code with them. And even the languages that originally weren't meant for some of the use cases, you can use them a lot of times to accomplish what you want to accomplish. Let me give you an example. There's node.js, right? So basically, this is based on the engine that they use for the Chrome browser in order to make a backend, right? And you can do so in JavaScript, right? JavaScript was never meant to that. It was meant for, coding reactive pages on the web, so basically on the front end. It wasn't meant to be a backend language, but now you can do that. And now that you have a compilable language with node.js, it's actually very easy to do a lot of things with this that, formerly you would have had to code in Java, in Python, maybe even you would have go back to like C# or another object-oriented language in order to be able to achieve that. Now you have node.js, which, if anything, is a functional programming language, right? If that was a little bit overwhelming, I think we're going to get into all of the topics, what those things are that I just talked about in the coming weeks, and there's a lot to explore there. But my point is, it's not really all that important what kind of programming language you choose to start out with. Having said that, this video is supposed to be about what I'm going to be picking for 2020 and what I'm going to be doing most of my projects with, right? And I'm going to go like probably full mainstream in 2020 and pick Python for most of my programming needs, right? Python is one of those languages that I just mentioned is very versatile, right? So once you have the syntax down and a little bit of, this Pythonic feeling, there's actually a whole, let's call it a philosophy behind coding in Python. And, real enthusiasts, they will be able to tell you what that's all about. It's basically about using as little code, so as little syntax, as possible, right? If you can do something with just one line of code, that's incredibly Pythonic, and people will actually love that. And it makes sense, right? It's very effective, and that's what you want out of a programming language. Having said that, my reason for going there is historical. So when I started out coding some applications on the web, on mobile, what I did was I coded the backend back then in node.js, which I just mentioned. Which are basically the endpoints which manages my database, right? And then I coded the front end also in JavaScript, and I went a little bit into Android programming, which is in Java. My aim basically was just making the front end, so, what you can see on your phone, what you can see on your desktop computer, talk to my endpoints in order to retrieve some sort of information that I would then use to present to the user, right? That's the basic idea of any application you can think about. It's basically, chat applications. You just basically save your text on a server, and then the person you're chatting to can retrieve that text from the server. So, I just noticed that my screens went out. I've been talking for too long, basically. Just putting it out there, Python, my language of choice, because once I got a little bit more into coding the backend, the actual logic behind my applications, I did that in Python. And I found it a little difficult to implement Python with node.js endpoints, right? I know there's a couple of libraries that do that for you, but I never felt like I had complete control end to end, which is what I like about the full stack, right? So now I've discovered, not really discovered, I knew it was there for a long time, but I've discovered my liking towards Flask, right? Which is a micro framework from Python that allows you to very quickly create endpoints, that allows you to serve static sites, and having said that, integrating that obviously with a Python program that's written on the backend is a lot easier, a lot more intuitive, and gives you a lot more control over than if you had to spin up a separate server for Node.js, right? So basically, going into 2020, I want to up my game with Python, specifically the Flask micro framework, and I want to try to basically use my applications in that manner. Additionally, I think in 2020, Linux, or, for that matter, shell scripting, is going to be a lot more relevant than it already has been. Basically, all servers run on that, right? The entire cloud runs on that. But Microsoft now loves Linux big time, right? And Linux becomes more relevant to everyday users as well, right? Now there's decent gaming on Linux. Linux actually has some good UIs that, in my personal opinion, are a lot more intuitive than Windows. And also that kind of rival macOS. I know I'm making a couple of enemies here, but when it comes down to it, macOS is just a nice skin on Linux with, some fancy bells and whistles around it anyway. And I think the open source community has created a couple of really good intuitive user interfaces for Linux that a lot more people are going to start using. With that in mind, I think the year of 2020 is going to be really relevant to know those two languages, Python and shell scripting. Well, I know shell scripting is not really a language anyway, but that's what I'm going with. If you want to start out with something that is future-proof, that you can use in 2020 to get a good job, those are my two recommendations. Get started coding in Python and understand shell scripting, get familiar with the Linux OS. And Well, having said that, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's extremely important that if you just start out, it doesn't really matter what kind of language you start with. Pick any that you can get your hands on. There's a bunch of tutorials out there, a bunch of them are free. So if you find one with a presenter, with a tutor that you like, it doesn't matter what the language is, just get started with it and then think of the projects that you want to build. Because in the end, that's what's important, right? You start thinking about, this is the project that I want to build, and then you think, what are the tools that I'm gonna need in order to build this project, right? So think about if you want to start in some manufacturing, right? You want to do something at home, DIY stuff, right? And you desperately think about, what kind of tool should I buy, right? If you don't know what you want to build, it's always a bad idea to just go out and buy a tool, because what's it going to be useful for if you don't know what you're going to build? And then imagine that, you go out and you buy a lawnmower, but it turns out you want to build a chair. Now that's not really going to work, right? So if you had thought about this previously, you might have bought a saw and some wood, and I don't really know what you need for a chair, and this is a fairly labored metaphor, I admit that, but you get my point, right? Make up your mind, think, okay, I want to build a chair, what kind of tools do I want for that? And the same thing is true for software. You know, if you go like, I want to build something where I can store the results of every football game and I want to be able to provide them to my users. Well, then you go like, all right, I need a database, right? So what kind of tool would you need for a database? Well, you would have to decide if that's a document-based database or if it's a relational database and so forth. So there's a lot of questions that you have to ask yourself beforehand. But once you have that figured out, and once you know what's actually good for your project in order to build it the way that you want, that's your decision for the language. I know this has been a really long video. Thanks for your patience, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a little bit from it, and let me know down in the comments section if you agree with me, if you have any comments, and, well, even if you have a contradicting opinion, let me know. We can talk about it. Have a good day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.